Welcome, everybody, to today's podcast and our listening audience. We're talking with Paul Coulter, who is currently a consultant and has an extensive career in growth for companies and a background in hospitality as well. Paul and I meet monthly with some very talented, seasoned executives, and it's a group called Dream Builders. Find God's dreams for our lives and use our uniqueness to benefit others. He's got several decades of B2B sales and growth experience. He helps organizations achieve growth and scaling their goals. So he's also president of the Priority Concepts Group, which provides consulting and executive coaching to clients across various industries. So, hey Paul, how you been?
Hey, good morning, Don. Good to see you. Thanks for having me this morning.
Yeah, it's really fun to get a chance to hear a little bit and share with our audience. I've talked extensively, but um, tell us a little bit about your career. What
Sure.
how did you get started, and where's it led you?
Well, first off, Don, I really appreciate your mentorship as I transitioned from a career in hospitality. I spent 20 years doing convention sales, and as we both know, over the boat and cigars out behind your house, you have a beautiful view of Disney. And I had 17 great years at the Walt Disney World Swan and Dolphin, where I was able to bring some of the brightest companies in the world to the convention mecca, if you will, Orlando. Orlando certainly is known for tourism, but it's also certainly known for bringing business and enterprise here through. And we've worked with Visit Orlando, worked with um, Starwood at the time. We went through an acquisition when Marriott acquired Starwood, and then right there on Disney property, we worked in conjunction with Disney as well. So
Right.
that's how I got my career started here in Orlando, and appreciate your background in the hospitality industry, and then that transition into consulting.
Yeah. So, you know, how did your faith play a part in your journey? Because I know your background and I know a little bit of your story, but share with our audience a little bit about, you know, how you felt led, or how did that all come together?
Sure, sure. You know, I had the either luxury or the benefit of being a PK. Um, certainly faith was very important with my dad and my mom, and my mom is particular. I remember waking up in the morning and she'd be sitting with her little light at her desk reading the Bible, and I thought it was way too early to get up, and I was one of the earlier kids to wake up, and so just that example, I think, really rolled into um, where I am today. I think there was a point in my life where I went through a journey, if you will, into the wilderness, um, somewhat like the children of Israel, where you're wandering and not really engaged or in tune with what the purpose and the calling was. And I think recently I've gone through that over the past number of years, and it's really um, tied me back to a different direction in my career and really pursuing the purpose that I believe that He's placed in my life. So,
Yeah.
um, but but I'd say that all points back to my parents. So I'm very thankful and grateful for that.
Yeah. So, how did you come to be successful as a consultant? And we'll talk about some of the projects you've worked on and things that you've been involved with, which are very interesting and some of them large in scale. So, how did you become so successful as a consultant?
Well, I would say, success is relative depending on what you're trying to accomplish and what the goal is. But from moving into this transition, it's part of the journey, right? You're growing in something new and growing in something different. But I would say this really goes back to that faith point in my life. I was working 17 hours a day almost, waking up at 4 or 5 in the morning to start work. Great career, and I have nothing but gratitude for where I was working. But post pandemic, we hadn't had hired back headcount on my team, and we're doing the roles of multiple people. And I realized, at that point in time, my wife and my four children were kind of getting the second of me, if you will. And if that, waking up at 5, and then my wife's like, "Hey, Paul, time for you to put the kids to bed." And I realized that whole day I hadn't talked to my wife and kids for a period. So I kind of went through this renewal process, if you will. Some people call it a midlife crisis. I think it's a midlife awakening, if you will. And my wife and I agreed that I'd take a sabbatical for a few months, and that just really helped to get clarity after nearly 2 decades of corporate work. And with that, there were some really great opportunities that were put before me, including opening Evermore, which was the old Grand Cypress golf resort, and those villas, and that was transformed into a $1.5 billion resort with a Conrad, with villas, with flats and vacation homes. And that's just phase one of a radical transformation there, right adjacent to Disney.
Right. And that, I think that project is immense, and the property was stunning, and it's right down the road from where I live, and so I
Right.
see what has transpired. But didn't they create an entire like lake system? And there's a lot of water in Orlando, but their whole concept of creating a water-based environment, because anybody knows here in Florida that lakefront property or anything on the water is super valuable. So didn't they engineer some really amazing things in that property at Evermore?
Yeah, so what they did is they took what used to be 27 holes of golf, consolidated it down to 18. That was the north, south, and east course, if you'll remember, at Grand Cypress. And then the new course still stayed intact for the link style course. But with that Florida course, they recontoured where the water was around the villas. They dug out what turned out to be 8 acres. And there's Crystal Lagoon technology, which is pretty radical. You'll see it popping up throughout the world right now, but it's basically an 8-acre swimming pool, if you will, for all other terms and purposes. But the filtration system is really unique. You can go out there. I was out there for one of my children's friends' birthdays, and we were paddle boarding, doing canoes with my youngest Tice, swinging off the rope swing out into the 12-foot drop. And then, there's some great water slides. So fun for all the family, and a great destination for business, especially if you're looking for advisory boards or executive briefing conversation.
Yeah. So what was your role? You came into that project at Evermore as a consultant, right? So,
Sure.
and
So
so what were the things that you were focused on as a consultant for that project?
Sure. I was taking a look, and I partnered with their senior director of marketing. She and I actually knew each other from years at the Walt Disney World Swan and Dolphin, where she ran digital marketing for Starwood and then for the region. And she pulled me in from a sales strategy where we built a customer advisory board. So we wanted to understand what the group experience was going to be like. So we did a ton of qualitative research to understand from some of the largest companies, everybody from IBM to HPE, and agencies in between, just determining what type of group would this be ideal for, and how could you use a resort oasis, if you will. They really like the term oasis, and it's that watery escape from all the craziness of Disney or iDrive. It's a real serene place where you can get away, refresh. And so with that, part of the component was you have these massive houses. You have 7 to 11 bedroom houses. And Don, if you were going to do a mastermind, or you were going to get a group of executives with each other, there's nothing greater than eating together, making memories together. And what type of groups would profile for leveraging and using these these home away from home facilities. And so we did some research, and certainly within the pharmaceutical space, there's some guidelines that might be the right fit or might not be the right fit for some of their advisory events. But certainly we decided, hey, there are 4 different types of housing arrangements, everywhere from you get the luxury experience of a Conrad to these vacation homes where you can cluster people together to do deep dives. So it was really a range, and then we developed personas to say, all right, this is how we market to each profile of a group that you may want to reach. So we set that up from the initial standpoint. That was my initial engagement.
Um, and I think that's really important that a lot of the consultants in our listening audience, etc., that don't forget that putting together that 3-day event or a retreat and putting people in that same environment. We took over, we did it at Disney one time with Vero Beach, and we would take over one of the top villas that could house like 12 people and do the whole weekend. The flip charts are in the living room, and we would do sessions, then we do breaks, we do walks on the beach, but just getting out of that environment and being able to focus on, in this day, the guy's name was Nat Mundy, and he had a Willy Wonka machine that could separate trash. And, you know, underneath Disney is the tunnels, right? You're familiar with
Right.
underground. And all that theme park trash gets moved from the property, so you never see somebody pushing a cart with garbage in it, etc. It just gets all sucked down below, but then it has to go somewhere. So he created a machine that could do separation, and it would pull out all the earth metals, anything metallic, etc., with earth magnets, and then he would take all the wet trash, dry it, and it would go through the conveyor belt, and then it would pelletize it into tiny little, almost like paper pellets, and then you could burn it in an incinerator like Tico Electric in Tampa would buy it because it burns 98% pure with little ash residue. And so they could create basically green energy on those things. So, you know, coming into a project like this and watching guys like Nat and guys like you to help these resorts, you know, think about not only, you know, a corporate retreat and to plan the business and the next generation, but also, wow, you know, you can talk about, you know, scripting what's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years, and you can only do that and when you're face to face for several days, because it goes through a wave of iterations. Sometimes it's, you know, exhilarating and we could do this. Other times it's like, this is terrible. Oh my gosh, that could tank us. But, you know, using a property like that, have you found those retreats with some of your senior executives and people super helpful over your years in hospitality?
Let me just even step back to the macro. I had the opportunity to serve with Corporate Event Marketing Association in a number of roles within their board. And we've talked about a lot of the trends that come along with event marketing, and certainly, you know, destinations like Evermore are great for connecting. But there's really 2 trends. You're seeing a lot of corporate enterprise going to these big, huge, massive impact splash events. Think Dreamforce, think from IBM, right? Like all of these large impact brand lift equations. But I'll say those are necessary for the enterprise. But what really is great for the small to mid-sized business, and what is actually critical and moves the needle quite a bit from the enterprise standpoint, are those small events, those VIP thought leadership equations where you bring everybody together and there's peer-to-peer contribution, right? Where peers are solving each other's problems or offering perspectives where you're really trying to shape the future or shape the vision for that enterprise. And I think you'll see that you've seen that across enterprise. There's this trend towards huge investments in executive briefing centers because when they're trying to do heavy deals, it's those senior buyers, the EVPs, the SVPs, the C-suite that really honestly signs the check, if you will. And so up leveling in those conversations is where businesses have been super successful recently. So you've seen that trend. Well, if you want to do, um, business in a little bit more of a casual environment, and you want to build in that retreat space, I think that's an ideal spot.
Yeah.
But
And
just
you,
a larger macro trend from getting people together, because a meeting could be you and me, Don. It could be face to face, two people. But a lot of these meetings are 12 people and under,
right.
high profile people that shape the future of organizations.
Exactly. And even, in our own small group where we have maybe 15 or 17 people around the table and we talk about what our dreams for the future, you know, what promise did God make when He created you, and who do you want to help, and how do you want to help them? That's been super impactful for a lot of us. And in consulting, I think the focus and what I hear most from you is you are really dialed in to what the client needs, whether it's on a macro level, a big level, or a small level. So I have a question for you. You've worked for and seen a lot of excellent leaders over the many years. What are some of the qualities or attributes you've most admired or tried to emulate? Or maybe on the dark side, you worked for some people and you said, hey, I'll never do that ever in my life as you see it played out. And no names, you don't have to name names. So, but just what are some of the excellent leaders and what have you tried to emulate?
The first component of that, I think, is curiosity, is really trying to understand, and this goes back to kind of what my consultancy really has its expertise in. It's where customer concepts converge, doing that discovery, understanding why people will buy, what the
Mm-hmm.
customer wants, and that really is the game changer for us. And I've had a couple great leaders that just mentored me in how to understand what a customer needs are, how to observe. You use all your senses to determine, hey, what really is needed. And so much of communication is in the nonverbal communication, right? So being able to understand, being able to assess, and then being able to fill that need, right? So I think good leaders really are curious and they invest a lot in the discovery process. Um, number two, though, I would say I had probably one of the best leaders ever in a man named Eric Opron, a guy originally from Ohio, like I am. Um, and I'll tell you, I don't know if you remember back to 2008, right when there was a lot of economic turmoil. I was selling, and I was a junior seller at the Swan and Dolphin. I was at 25% of my goal, Don, horrible in quota production. And I was handling the West Coast. People weren't traveling outside of their own region, so it wasn't an excuse, but it wasn't a bright time for conventions, if you recall.
Mm-hmm.
So I walked into his office one day, and I said, Eric, I said, hey. Well, he's like, how's it going, Paul? I said, hey, I don't think it's going very well. He's like, well, have a seat. And he shut the door, and he propped back in his seat, and he's like, well, tell me about this. I said, well, Eric, I'm like at 25% to goal. And he said, yeah. And I said, but I don't know what I can do to move the needle. I don't know how I can rectify this. He
Right.
said, well, Paul, answer me this question. He said, "Are you doing everything that you think you can do?" And I said, "Eric, I really do. I think I'm doing everything I can do." He said, "Well, from my seat, I feel I feel you are as well." I said, "But it doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter what anybody thinks." And at that moment, he also kind of didn't promise not to fire me, but he said didn't matter what I think. What matters is you wake up and you can look yourself in the mirror and know that you did your best. And he said that at the end of the day, that's what matters. And at that moment, he really empowered me to give my all, to give my best, to not worry about the results, but worry about the process. And I think as a leader, I can't I'm only beginning to thank him for all of the lessons that he taught me throughout that time at the Swan and Dolphin. But I think that was my number one takeaway. And then number three, um, if you're hiring somebody, and I learned this from another leader, if you're hiring somebody to do the job and to do it well because they're an expert at that. And so if you get in the way and you try to uh, dictate every step of the way and don't leave room to flex your style or have a little bit of creativity, it really can restrict the performance of a team. And I think it's really important as a leader to be able to give autonomy, to be able to clarify what the deliverables are, what the expectations are, but also let people have the flexibility to flex their style and get to the destination in a manner that aligns with the team, but yet is something that they've designed and come up with themselves.
Wow, that's a that's really good advice because people have different skill sets, etc. But I love the fact that you talked about being curious, and I took a page from Ted Lasso, which is be curious, not judgmental. You know, and that's interesting because in your curiosity you discover all kinds of things. But let's go, you know, how Pixar does their formula for any movie that Pixar does. It's always once upon a time there was a and then da 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 da, and then da da da. But then it goes to Act Two, which is, but then one day, Nemo swam out into the dark water, disobeyed his father, and because of that. So, can you share a crisis point in your career or a challenge you faced, how you faced it, and maybe what the outcome was? Nobody gets a pass. Everybody has their challenges. Can you share one of those?
Sure, and I'll tell you. Actually, so you mentioned Pixar. Believe it or not, this is a fun fact. When I went to school, I chose my university based upon it being a top five university for computer art. And one of my buddies that was in the computer art program got hired away after his freshman year to Pixar for six figures. And I ended up deciding that wasn't the track I wanted and veered off to English and business. But I definitely have a sweet spot in my heart for the wonderful work that they produce. So we talk about crisis, and I would say just in my own life, my wife would call it a crisis, and I would call it a renewal, departing from corporate world. And I would say, here's what I've learned through navigating and overcoming obstacles in that process. Uh, when you start to do things that you haven't done ever before, or when you start to uh, deliver on, or pursue a goal that you've never experienced before, right?
Right.
You need to leave yourself a little room for failure, and leave yourself a little room for a little grace of figuring things out. And honestly, if we're not pushing hard enough to fail, sometimes we're probably not pushing the limit of our
Yeah.
own potential, right?
Good
And
point.
so in that time, I had some great relationships, and I've had great relationships with opportunities to consult. And I think a lot of my early stage consulting has come through relationships. And when you go rely on relationships, it's great. I think the statistic from Harvard, somewhere around 90% of B2B services come through recommendations or referrals, right? So,
Mhm.
so relationships are a big key. Yet, I think one thing I discovered is how important the value proposition is. Like even my own value proposition. It's so funny. Sometimes I could coach a customer on how do you do discovery and how do you get to clarity with your value proposition. And sometimes for others, it's really it's not as difficult. But then you create your own value proposition, and then you narrow your focus, right, for yourself. And for me, I didn't necessarily narrow my focus early, and I was just this generalized consultant. And so, as I've kind of evolved and developed, I think there was a crisis moment where I wasn't flowing through the way I wanted to. You'd have peaks where you have a huge contract that's um, doing a go-to-market strategy for a $200 million waste company, highs of highs, and then you are like trying to figure out a few months later, oh, where's the next opportunity coming from? And you're kind of scrounging and calling a lot of people, trying to figure this out. So what all this taught me is one, you need to always be prospecting, no matter what in business. But number two, the sooner you can get to your product market fit, your value proposition as a consultant,
Hmm.
you can really refine in on who you are, your identity. Then that makes it easier for everybody to talk about you. And that makes it easy for your customers to refer you. And so I think that there was a crisis moment where I really had to drive in on that. I really had to talk to my customers and say, hey, what was the differentiator for you? Oh, well, at Evermore, we made all these construction decisions that equated to X millions of dollars based upon the qualitative feedback. Great. That helped really help refine who I was and then that value proposition.
Yeah, that validates you as a consultant, and you know, so some of the engagements. I mean, you've been involved with lots of different, you know, things that you focused on. So, if you were giving advice to somebody at whatever level, because we have consultants that are leaving corporate America today, and they use our Kingdom Growth Engine to software to focus on not only what are the small increments, because everything is about sales, ops, finance, or cash in any engagement. You know, it's either the acquisition of clients, it could be the marketing strategy on the front end, it could be operating efficiently, it could be, hey, did we price it right? And did we actually achieve what we thought we were going to do? That's super important. Um, and so, using our software and what we do with Kingdom Growth Engine helps narrow the field so that you can get in front of somebody and demonstrate what a solid ROI is. But what are some of the key skills or attributes or talents you'd advise someone, whether they're, young and they're coming into consulting, or they're in the middle, or they're making a life transition from corporate America, which is a whole bunch of people, and now want to go into consulting? What attributes or talents would you advise someone to continue to develop at whatever stage they're in? What do you think?
I think I would advise a little bit, and you could probably advise on the longer term consulting. Right now, I'm just approaching 5 years of consulting, so um, a little bit on the shorter side. But back to what I said before, the more you can niche down initially, the better you're going to be. Number two, don't go it alone. find a mentor. Like you gave me some amazing feedback when I was getting kicked off, Don, about how to how just really the formula of communicating and evaluating everything. If you jump into consulting without a specific process that you follow and adhere to,
Right.
you're not going to get consistent, repeatable results. So develop all your processes along the way. Number
Yeah.
three, or well, really number two B. So don't go it alone in terms of mentorship, but realistically, there is an ecosystem for whatever niche. If you're consulting for enterprise, if you're consulting for nonprofits, if you're consulting for mid-sized businesses, if you're starting for consulting for startups,
Right.
there are other experts that are along the continuum for your ICP, right? Your ideal customer profile, whoever that is, right? There are other suppliers and providers along that continuum that offer a different value proposition and offer a different service than you do.
Hmm.
And it's really important to partner, I believe, in this era, to have a partnership strategy and to have to give generously to those other people along the ecosystem. And as you do, there's opportunities that are coming back to you when one of their customers needs growth consulting, sales consulting, something like that, right? And I think as you look for peer-to-peer recommendations, there's going to be premium offerings if you're just stepping your foot into the waters. There's going to be people that are charging, $100,000 for what you might charge $10,000 for, and that's fine. And I think having those relationships, having those partnerships, that also opens doors for new opportunities, new sales as you make that transition.
Yeah. That's collaboration is really important, and a lot of times as we refer other people, like if it's SEO and it might be social media campaigns, things, whether it's LinkedIn, Instagram, etc. I don't want to get into the execution of that. I like to understand the strategy and where they're going with it, but I don't want to get into the weeds of doing that. So I love to have uh, people that I recommend. And if I do recommend somebody, I actually don't ever participate in that. I'm not looking for a commission on it. I just say, you should talk to Paul Coulter because he's really good at this. And that's between you. I make my money and I get my value from working with my own clients. I don't need to recommend people on stuff. Now, people have different philosophies. That's just me. So I just say, talk to this guy. If you need a strategic plan to sell your business in the next 5 years and you want to grow and then figure out how to maximize your wealth, I can say, talk to Hilgard Lamprecht. He's fabulous at that. Now, I'm not looking to Hilgard to pay me for that. I'm just saying he's the best person I know in the role. And I think that served me well. But anyway, so little side. But what are you thinking about today? And what books or seminars have you been reading or got a little bit from recently? What What are you thinking about? What are you reading?
So what I'm thinking about is something actually kind of based upon this, and you alluded to the transition of many corporate people into the consulting space or
Hmm.
into new business ownership, right? And
Right.
I think there's going to be this small business renewal, if you will, over the next few years in a period. And I think that's driven by a lot of different factors. I think AI is taking a more prominent role in some of the jobs
Yeah.
and going to increase efficiencies and going to also um, change how we operate. And some people are scared that it's going to change or kick out or remove roles, right? I think at the same time, I think that really opens up opportunities for others,
Yeah.
for others to own their own business and to really grab a hold of their destiny. and start to live into some of their purpose and some of what they were designed for.
Right.
So I think on a macro approach, that's one thing that's really interesting. Um, uh, there's a guy named Michael Porter, just from a larger business standpoint. Um, there's a guy named Michael Porter who is a Harvard professor, and uh, he's talked about clusters and business clusters, and we talk about consulting and working together. There's kind of an idea that when like companies or like organizations cluster together, there's this opportunity for challenging each other, really up leveling the competition, but then also increasing collaboration. So this cooperation kind of mindset, and I think you'll see that in consultancy, um, a little bit to what I mentioned before about partnerships. But diving into his thoughts and ideas have been really enlightening recently. Um, and I think that really plays well to the Orlando ecosystem, whether that be AR, VR, whether that be deep tech with space,
Right.
whether that hospitality innovations, or medical innovations down kind of towards Lake Nona. There's going to be some really interesting radical transformation that happens in Orlando, and honestly, a lot of it, believe it or not, Don, we're known for Disney storytelling and theme parks and vacationers. But what the masses don't see, and people outside of the bubble, they don't realize the amount of federal investment, if you will, throughout the Central Florida corridor. You've got
Yeah.
over in Tampa, Palm, you've got all of the simulation. Do you realize that simulation was invented here in Central Florida? Flight
Hmm.
simulators were invented here in Central Florida. Then you go over to the huge, obviously, Space Force investment and everything that's happening on the Space Coast. This whole region is going to be radically transformed over the next, by 2030, even starting, but 10 years, certainly 10, 20 years. And so I think that really has been interesting to see. But
Yeah.
where there's opportunity is you've got this amazing hospitality experience, this amazing tourism district. And then up here, you've got all of this innovation that's happening throughout Central Florida. I think one of the books that I love recently is a book called Unreasonable Hospitality. And
Love it.
you're familiar with that, Don?
I wrote a blog. It's called Unreasonable Consulting off of Will Guidara's book. And when he took 11 Madison Park from last place to the number one restaurant in the world, that story is compelling. It's a 2 year old book, but absolutely. And so, how do we apply those principles to us? And that book was so inspiring. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, amazing book. And I read it a little bit ago, but I keep referencing back to it for different reasons or whatnot. But I think you have this opportunity in Central Florida where you have all of this innovation that's happening, and then you have all this hospitality tourism that's happening. And if you can take that hospitality approach and infuse it in this innovation conversation and link the two, um, I think our
Yeah.
communities have opportunity that's beyond what many can imagine or think right now, Don.
Yep. Yeah. I love it. It's just like it's almost like marrying the back of the house where the chef thinks that everything in the restaurant is about the food and amazing food, amazing dishes, we create stuff. But the front of the house is going, no, it's about service. It's the GM and all the servers that say, hey, we're connecting with clients, and that's why they come back, is because that we know their names, we know their stuff, we do. And Guadara took that restaurant to number one in the world by marrying those two. And I think what you just articulated was, hey, if we could take that same, you know, magic of remarkable power of giving people more than they expect and marry that to whether it's from hospitality into what is now this high-tech corridor with SpaceX and all the rest of the different people. If we could do those two things, um, Orlando and the region is obviously going to explode. And people always talk about Silicon Valley, but I think Orlando is the next one. So, hey, listen,
Well, it's
go ahead.
it's already happening. There's already VCs from California that are starting to move into the area. Just this last week, I was at a pitch event for one where they're highlighting a lot of their early stage companies. So people are starting to take notice, but mark my words, I think it's only going to increase and escalate from here.
Yeah. Hey, if somebody wants to connect with you and continue the conversation or whatever, or they're looking for a consultant, I know, you've used our Kingdom Growth Engine software and you can demonstrate quickly what you can do for people. But if someone wants to connect with you, what's the best way? Do you want to give them an email address or should they just connect with you on LinkedIn? What's your preference?
Sure. Yeah, it's Paul at priorityconceptsgroup.com. Concepts is plural, so priorityconceptsgroup.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn at Paul J. Coulter. So
Hey,
LinkedIn.
looking forward to it. Let's have coffee soon and we'll catch up. Paul, you've been amazing and this is so helpful for a lot of people. So it's going to be fun to share this with the entire community. So thank you so much.
Well
Have a
done.
great
Thank you.
rest of the week.
Cheers.